Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today I wanted to share with you some of the new decks that have come into my collection. I have fallen off the depthier wagon in terms of my buying over the last month or two. So in the latter part of March, kind of ironically, right after I posted my depthier 3-month check-in, I kind of fell off the wagon like pretty hard in terms of my deck purchases. Now, some of this is pretty much retail therapy, right? Because there is a lot of stuff going on right now in the world, and I will be the first to admit that some of these are total retail therapy purchases, and some of them were just purchases because I have really thought about it. Some of them were very mindful. Some of them happened to be decks that I was already planning on purchasing when they came out or when they became available. So there's like one or two that is kind of like forgivable, so to speak. But the other ones are really just, yeah, I fell off the wagon. I wanted some new decks. I felt the need for some new decks. Even though I have plenty of decks and I have lots of decks that I still have yet to work with. I have decks that I've moved out of my collection and really, I guess, to make room for more decks. I think that for the most part, a lot of these purchases were pretty on point. I've gotten to the point in my sort of deck collecting that I kind of know what I like. And for the most part, I know what's going to resonate with me, and I know what I use certain decks for. So I have decks that I use for certain reasons or for certain readings or for certain rituals, reasons, readings, and rituals. And so I have a really good idea of how I incorporate those into my practice at this point in my tarot journey. That's many years of me kind of fine-tuning, adjusting, and as I mentioned in my personal tarot practice videos that I did last month, that is something that always continues to grow and change. I just thought that we would take some time and kind of take a look at some of the new decks that I got, and I wanted to share them with you all. I think it's really important for me personally that going about this whole depth year, I'm not on a no-buy year. What I wanted, my whole goal was to be more mindful of the things that I did bring into my practice, but really it goes beyond just the purchases. For me, it's more about diving deep into certain areas of my practice. Tarot is only one of them. So I think it's really important that I allow myself that freedom. I'm not chastising myself for falling off the wagon. I'm not, berating myself because I purchased decks that I didn't really intend to purchase. Sometimes you just need to do the things that you need to do to get through. And sometimes for me, that does mean retail therapy in the form of deck purchases. And I'm just going to be honest about that. That is the thing I do. When I don't feel really great, sometimes I shop for decks. Sometimes I buy decks. Sometimes I just window shop. It's just a part of a thing that I do, especially when I can't get out. I feel like bringing something in kind of helps when I can't get out. And for me, that's not necessarily even about an isolation or a quarantine thing in terms of what's going on with the world. For me, that has to do with my health. So sometimes when my health takes a turn for the worst, I can be bedridden for weeks at a time. And so when I can't get out, then being able to bring stuff in is very helpful for me. And having new things to explore and new things to dive deep into is an important part of my healing process in terms of health-related things. So not to kind of justify it, but there is an underlying reason why I sometimes purchase decks, even though I say I'm not going to purchase decks, and then, I'll get down and then I decide that this particular deck feels like it might make a connection for me that I need right now in terms of my personal wellness. So that does happen from time to time. I think it's really important for me personally to remember that depth year is something that I'm choosing to do. So as I stated in my very first video on it, I reserve the right for myself to ditch whatever doesn't work for me. And for the month of the end of March and the whole month of April, not buying decks didn't work for me. It didn't work for me in terms of my personal mental health. I needed to have some new things to explore. Everything was a bit chaotic, as we all know, and so yeah, I fell off the wagon, and that's okay, that happens. So that is my little sort of video admission here, and I'm gonna flip the camera around so we can actually take a look at the decks that I have acquired in the last month and a half. So starting with the tarot decks, I'm going to go mostly in chronological order. Two of these decks I actually bought in March. The rest of them were all April purchases. So as we'll be able to see, I purchased a lot of decks in April. So one of my purchases from March was the Dame Darcy Mermaid Tarot. So I fell in love with Dame Darcy's Queen Alice Tarot, and it's a deck that I've been working with quite a bit. And then I saw a video from Lisa at Supportive Tarot where she talked about she got a copy of the Mermaid Tarot, and it's one that has been on my wish list for a really long time. And then Dame Darcy, there was a sale, or I got a coupon, I'm not sure which it was, but I decided to go ahead and take the plunge and grab this deck because I absolutely adore Dame Darcy's artwork. I have a couple of her books as well, and I love the artwork. I love the vibe of her decks, and so I thought, what a better time to get this, especially coming into summer, because to me this feels like it might be kind of a summery deck, you know, mermaids and whatnot. So it has beautiful backs. It has a gold gilding, which I think suits this deck really well. I mean, it looks like it's, you know, a frame, which is kind of cool because we have this frame on the front. I love the backs on this deck. So I think they're really cool. And this has just that very vintagey, kind of old style, you know, comic booky type artwork, which is, you know, in tune with Dame Darcy's work. And I love the kind of muted palette of it. Whereas the Queen Alice Tarot is very vibrant, this is very kind of muted and soft, and it just has a really warm energy to it, which I wasn't, you know, really expecting from the deck. So it's been one that I've really enjoyed working with. Like I said, I adore Dame Darcy's artwork, and so I kind of knew I was going to love this deck just because I love the Queen Alice so much and I love her artwork. So it's definitely one of my favorite new decks. I think for the most part, I like all the decks I bought. One of the things that kind of as you get to, as your collection expands, you kind of get to know your taste a little bit better of what you like and what you don't like. Sometimes I still have, you know, misses, and sometimes decks that I don't think I'm really going to like surprise me. But for the most part, I kind of knew this was going to be one that I was going to enjoy working with. And of course it is. So that is the Dame Darcy's Mermaid Tarot. So the other deck that I bought in March was the Herb Crafters Tarot, and this is one that I went back and forth about. I wasn't really sure I was gonna get it. I don't work with herbs in the way that a lot of people do because I have asthma and I have really bad skin allergies, so me and herbs sometimes don't get along. But I really want to learn more about herbs and the, you know, the energy behind them and that kind of thing. Even though I may not necessarily be able to physically use herbs, there are a lot of them that I've found that I'm actually allergic to. But even though I can't physically use a lot of them in terms of like putting them on my skin or ingesting them or things of that nature, I do still want to be able to tap into the energy of the plants. So here's the beautiful backs on it. I adore the artwork in this deck, and as you can see, it's still in order. I haven't actually worked with it yet. I got it because I'll be honest, I had a gift certificate for Amazon, and this was one that was on my wish list, like my Amazon wish list for quite a while. Like since it very first came out, I was like, oh, that's really cool artwork, and I really kind of want to give it a chance and get to know it. But I just never actually, you know, pull the trigger. It's a mass market deck. It's not like it's terribly expensive or anything like that. It was just kind of hanging out on my wish list. I have a lot of decks that hang out on my wish list, actually. And I had a gift certificate, so I thought I'm going to go ahead and get this one. And I got it, obviously, in March with the intention of working with it throughout the spring. But that really just hasn't happened. And I think that's because I'm doing so many different other deck studies right now, more than I normally would do. I normally only study one deck at a time, but right now I'm doing a couple of them, and I just didn't have the energy or the the time to really dive deep into another deck. So this one might actually, you know, it might just hang out till next spring on my shelf, or it might be one that I feel called to work with at some point throughout the year, even though it feels like it might be a very spring deck to me. But I think, you know, that's just me and my personal practice. Most people probably don't work with their decks in tune with the season. Most people probably work with decks as they feel called to. Not that I don't do that as well, but I have definite decks that I work with at specific times of the year, and I just don't actually feel the call to work with them outside of that season that I have associated it with. And these are all just my personal associations. So we'll see where it ends up in my practice. The artwork is stunning, and I hear the guidebook is wonderful. So I thought it might be a good way to kind of utilize cards to help me learn a little bit more about herbs and, you know, plant medicine and that sort of thing. So that's the Herb Crafters Tarot. So moving into April, one of the decks that I was really looking forward to getting, I did not do the Kickstarter, and this is the Forager's Daughter Tarot. And it has beautiful backs, which I love. They're very simple and understated, and I think it's just gorgeous. It has some lovely rose gold gilding, and it seems to be like higher quality because it doesn't really hurt. Like, is it just me? I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but there are a difference in gildings, right? I found that some gildings, some shiny gilding I can do. It's like it's a higher quality or maybe a different type. I don't know. The Tildwick is a great example of that. It's a deck that I've left the gilding on because it doesn't bother me to work with it. And this is another one that I've left the gilding on because it doesn't bother me to work with it. And it's pretty. I mean, especially when they do something different like this rose gold. But this deck is, it's an animal deck, and that's not something that I really had been drawn to in the past, or really at all. I don't think throughout my entire tarot practice, since it began in the early 90s. I've never been drawn to animal decks, but that's changed for me, and this one is an animal deck. It's also very pippy, which I really like, and it does pull in a lot of plant energy as well. I do have the guidebook that goes with this deck, and I actually, to be perfectly honest, I haven't read through the whole thing yet. I don't really feel that I need to in order to work with this deck, but I am excited to read the guidebook in more depth when I have some time. I like to really sit with my guidebooks and really give them the time and attention that they deserve. It's got a lovely linen finish to it. It shuffles beautiful. It reads beautiful. This would be one of the exceptions. I am not fan of Ten of Swords where it's, swords into things where it looks like, they're very clearly dead. However, at least we don't have the blood spilling out everywhere. So we can definitely look at that as, a moving on. But, then we have cards like this Knight of Wands here, and how beautiful. This King of Pentacles. It's just, it's an animal deck, which isn't normally my thing, but these days I've come to a whole new appreciation for animal decks, and I'm really excited to have this one in my collection. So while this was I broke my depth year for it type of thing, I knew that this was a deck that I was going to break my depth year for. So, I had kind of a list of a few decks that I was okay with, not okay with, right? Because this is my own, nobody's telling me I have to do this, right? This is my own limitations that I have put on myself strictly because I want to get to know the decks that I already have, because I do have quite a few decks in my collection that I haven't worked with yet. And so the idea was not to bring more of them in, not because I didn't want them or anything of that nature, but because I was trying to really focus in on the ones that I already had. But this was one of the decks that was on the list of I was going to make an exception for. There's another one that I'm going to mention here at the end of the video that was on the list of I'm going to make an exception for. So I had those going in, and so I'm totally okay with that. But this one is gorgeous. It's a lovely produced deck, and I've really enjoyed working with it. So that is the Forager's Daughter Tarot. So the next deck on my falling off the depth year Wagon list was the Incidental Tarot, and this is a deck that I've recently modified. It did have white borders around it, so I just took the white borders off and I edged it, and it has gorgeous little orange and red backs, which I think are really pretty. This deck, of course, I made a bag for it because once I trimmed it, it was kind of knocking around in its box. It had just a talk box anyway, but I made it kind of this quilted type pattern because I can't go to the craft store and get fabric as I normally would. So I'm using my scraps to create some bags right now. But this particular deck I saw from Renee at Meadow Lark Mystic, and we were talking about it, and she was sending me pictures of it and readings she was doing with it, and I was like, it's pippish, it's got beautiful colors, I love the richness of it. As you can see here, like I said, it's very much a pip style deck, and I just really enjoyed the look of it. This is a super rambly video. I fell in love with the artwork. It was really what all it came down to. And it has just such this warm sort of storybook feel to it that I just absolutely love. And so I went ahead and purchased it. So definitely one that was not on my list or on my radar, and one that I kind of fell in love with and purchased it anyway. So that is another deck in my falling off the wagon, that I fell off the wagon for, I should say. So that is the Incidental Tarot. So the next deck that I purchased, and as I mentioned, I'm actually kind of going in chronological order of how I purchased it. However, starting with Forager's Daughter, the rest of these were all in April. So that's a lot of decks in April. The next one that I purchased is the Muse Tarot, and this is the mass market edition. This, I will say, is not the first time I've had this. I did the Kickstarter and had the indie edition, but the Lightseers Tarot really didn't work for me. So I passed it along. I also had the Muse Tarot, and I passed the Muse Tarot along with it, the indie version, because it was kind of a package thing, and the person that I passed it on to really wanted both of them. So I knew that at this point that this was coming out mass market. I don't particularly care for the cardstock on the indie version. It's really thick and I had trouble working with it. So I was okay with letting that go to get the mass market, because for me this is more of a usable cardstock. It's flexible, it shuffles really well, and I find that this deck is really interesting. I definitely use it more for creative work and creative projects. I find that as just like a regular tarot or a daily reader, it doesn't really connect that way for me. For me, it's definitely a deck of creative exploration, I guess, is the way I would say it. And I'm not fond of the kings being the other way. But again, because I don't read with this really as a tarot, I read with it more in a creative way. I'll talk about that more in my wrap up, because this is a deck that I have been using in May. It's beautiful, and I do really like the artwork. I think that Chris Ann's artwork is gorgeous. The Lightseers is gorgeous. It's just not a deck that I really connected to. I do have her Sacred Creators Oracle, and it's definitely one of my favorites. I think I heard that's coming mass market too, and I will probably, if that's true, I will probably grab a copy of that, just because, again, this cardstock for me is more usable. For me, this is all about creative inspiration. Like I said, I don't read with it as a tarot, but as a doorway into creativity. I think this deck is amazing, and that is definitely how I use it. So that is the mass market edition of the Muse Tarot. So the next deck that I purchased, I giggle because this deck has a little bit of a story with it for me. This is the, as you saw, the Angel Tarot cards by Radley Valentine. This is a Hay House deck. So this deck has a little bit of a funny story to it. I'll flip through the cards as I kind of tell you. They are still in order. But at the beginning part of April, maybe very late March, I subscribed to the Gaia Network. And I started watching some of the videos on it because some of them are really interesting. There were a couple of interviews or specials. I can't remember which show it was on. Probably should have looked that up, but it was basically interviews with Radley Valentine. And he was talking about tarot, and he was showing this particular deck. Anyway, there were a couple episodes of Radley Valentine talking about, you know, his experience with angels and his deck and things of that nature. And so I was like, that's kind of cool. Now that I've seen that, I kind of feel a little bit of like a connection or an understanding there. So I thought, I'm going to go ahead and get his Angel Tarot. I love his Guardian Angel Tarot. That's like one of my favorite decks, and I use it all the time. So I went ahead and I got this one. Hay House was having a sale. So I grabbed this, a couple of books, and I, you know, got it, and I have flipped through it many times. Some of the artwork I really love. Like, oh, these are so beautiful. Some of the artwork is a little bit missed for me, but it's nothing that I can't deal with. I hate to say it that way because that sounds super snobby, but you know what I mean? Like, sometimes when the artwork takes you away from the moment, takes you out of the moment, takes you away from the card, that's not good. That's what I'm talking about. But this doesn't do that. I can work with this deck, I think. Like I said, I haven't done any readings with it, but I've looked through it many times, and I really quite enjoy the artwork of it. So I'm looking forward to actually working with it and to reading with it. But that was kind of my story of how I ended up with this deck, was because I saw that interview with Radley Valentine, and he was doing some readings with this deck, and I was just like, that's pretty cool. He seems like a pretty cool guy, so I'm gonna get his deck because I love the Guardian Angel Tarot. So that's my story on this one and why I broke my depth ear for it. So that is the Angel Tarot cards. So the next deck that I purchased probably shortly after the Angel Tarot cards was the Efflorescent Tarot. Now, this one kind of has, I guess, a little bit of a story too. I've always found the artwork in this deck to be really beautiful, and but I found it to be like a little bit sad and somber. And I was kind of feeling that way at the beginning of April, and I just, I was kind of down, to be perfectly honest with you. And this deck, that card's a little hard for me. But this deck kind of tapped into that for me, that sad kind of somber state. And sometimes when you're in that particular place, you don't want a happy, fluffy, like, I mean, no offense, angel deck to, tell you everything's going to be okay. Sometimes you want that kind of sad, somber energy because it's something that you need to work through, right? You don't need to wash over it. You need to dive into it. You need to work through it. I mean, look at this High Priestess. She looks like she is so sad. She has been crying. And in those moments, I mean, she's beautiful though. Look at her. In those moments when I feel that way, I don't want happy, fluffy decks. I don't want something to make me feel better. I want something to help me understand where the sadness comes from. And to me, I think this is a deck that does that quite well, although I will have to say that I haven't really worked with this deck. I've just really been looking through it, occasionally just pull it out, look through it, and whatever card kind of catches my attention, that's the one that I sink into. But I think that the artwork is just stunning on this deck, and it just has that kind of melancholy that sometimes I just find that I need to explore the melancholy. I need to understand the sadness. And for me, this is a deck that I think is going to do that beautifully. So that is, again, another deck that I broke my depth here for, but because I needed a deck to really tap into that, sort of sad, somber space. And I don't think I have another deck in my collection that really does that to the degree or as effectively as the Efflorescent Tarot does. So I'm really actually quite happy that I got it because it has that energy that is totally unique to itself, I think. So that is the Efflorescent Tarot. So the final tarot deck that I bought in April, and I don't think I bought any decks in May. I think it was actually good in May. is the Archangel Power Tarot cards, and this is again another Radley Valentine deck. This one, after my whole Angel Tarot Radley Valentine interview things, I checked it out because I looked at all of his decks, to be perfectly honest. After I watched the video, I was like, I'm going to check out all his decks because I love the one that I have. And at this point, I think I had the Angel Tarot in hand. Here's the backs of it, which are, I don't know, they're okay. And I was like, I'm going to check it out. Here's the thing with this deck. I really like the concept of it, but this is the type of artwork that really kind of takes me away from the card. And that's not a diss against the creator or the artist or anything of that nature. It is beautiful artwork and it's right, and I know a lot of people like it. It's just, for me, sometimes this type of style has a tendency to take me out of the experience of the card. But anyway, it's the concept, because I have been doing a lot of research with angels and guides and ancestors and things of that nature recently. The concept of this deck, which is the majors are all angels, and then the minors are divided into the four main archangels. So we have the suit of Gabriel, or I think of her as Gabrielle because she's very often depicted as a woman, as she is in this deck. This is the suit of Pentacles, but it's a little bit since I've looked through the guidebook, so you'll have to forgive me if I'm wrong. Then we have the suit of Raphael, which is the suit of Water, which works really well, I think, for him. But it's just some things like that just kind of pull me away. But I really like the concept of this deck. And then we have the suit of Michael, which is the suit of Swords or Air, which is, I think, lovely, fits him well. And then we have, if I could get to it, the suit of Ariel, which, I'm sorry, this is the suit of Pentacles. Now that I'm seeing it, I remember. And Gabriel or Gabrielle is the suit of Wands or Fire. So yeah, it's really the concept of this deck that I am intrigued by. So that is another one that, like, again, Hay House and their sales. Sometimes they get me with those. They really do, because I got this one in another one of the Hay House sales. There were a couple of books that I wanted to, so I went ahead and got those because I'm definitely not doing like a depth year or a low buy with my books. I probably should be, especially nowadays because I'm buying lots of them. However, I'm reading them all, so I guess that counts. But anyway, this was another one that I was like, I'm just going to go ahead and get it. I'm going to try it because sometimes seeing the cards on video or in photos, like, it just, I can't really tell, right? I got to get my hands on them. I got to be able to see them. And this is a relatively inexpensive mass market deck. So I felt okay with going ahead and making the purchase. If it doesn't work out for me, I can always pass it along to somebody else. But again, like I said, it's the concept of this deck that really interests me. And so I'm interested in checking it out and working with it and giving it a try, especially because that's kind of in line with where my studies have been lately. So that's my little rant on and why I purchased the Archangel Power Tarot cards. So moving on to the Oracle cards that I purchased, I did pretty good. I only purchased 3. I grabbed a copy of the Spirit Animal Oracle, which I'm actually really glad that I did. I've been using this all throughout the month of May for my wellness practice. And I've been, working with animal decks. I love the backs of it. And I've really enjoyed working with this one, especially in terms of my wellness practice, because how I use it really works well for that. And the animals are really wonderful. It has that nice new Hay House cardstock. It's matte. I do find that it's a little large. It's a little hard for me to get my hands around. I might actually trim it. Like, just take, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch off all sides just to make it a little bit smaller, but so I don't cut into anything important. Anyway, side note, I really love this deck. I do really like these cards. I thought maybe I would be a little bit distracted by like the ornamental stuff that's on the animals. But I find that it's, you know, like here we have like the little tattoo across the horse spirit face, but I really don't find it distracting. It really just doesn't bother me at all. I love the animals. I love the little messages down here. These have been really key for me in my wellness practice, and I've been tapping into that. But the little guidebook that comes with it too has some really great messages. So I've really been enjoying working with both the cards and the guidebook as well. So that is another one that I've really been enjoying working with, and glad that I actually made the purchase, even though it wasn't on my list. I should say that. It's always been on my wish list since it came out. It was on my list as like, I need to check out this deck, but it wasn't on my list of I'm willing to break my depth here for. But I'm glad I did, because I've really enjoyed working with it, and I've done a lot of work with it throughout the month of May. So it's been really wonderful. So that is the Spirit Animal Oracle. The next Oracle deck I purchased in spite of my depth year was the Archangel Gabriel, and I've talked about this deck in a couple of videos now, so I'm not going to go into super detail about it here, because you guys are probably sick of me talking about it. But this is one of those decks, here's the backs with the beautiful artwork on it, that I really quite love, and it really kind of surprised me. The thing that really pulled me into this deck was the use of real artwork in the imagery, as opposed to the more modern Photoshop type of artwork that we often see in angel type decks these days. And I bought it because, like I had said in other videos, I intended to modify it actually, and it just ended up working out for me the way it was. So I do a Archangel reading every week, and this is the deck that I use as the main focus for it. And then I use my Influence of the Angels Tarot to expand on that message. So it's a deck that I've really enjoyed working with, and has really kind of surprised me, and it's been wonderful. And I'm glad that I went ahead and made the purchase for that one, despite the fact that it wasn't on my list. So that's the Archangel Gabriel Oracle cards. And the last deck that I have to share with you is the last Oracle that I purchased, and that is the Whispers of the Ocean Oracle cards. Now this deck has been on my list, my wish list, for quite some time, because it's an ocean deck. And I love the ocean. The beach is like my favorite place to go. Some of my animal spirits that I like to tap into are ocean animals, and I have loved the idea of having a whole deck that is just ocean themed. And it's just, it's beautiful. It is still in order, because I am actually waiting till June to work with this deck, because I want to use it in my wellness practice all throughout June, much as I've used the Spirit Animal Oracle in May. So I'm kind of hanging on to it to work with it in that time. It's got lovely matte cardstock, which I really quite like. I'll be curious to see what I think of the title with the text underneath. Sometimes that's not my favorite on cards. I love the ocean energy, the vibe to it. Like I said, I haven't used it because I'm waiting, but yeah, I just felt like, you know, usually around this time of the year we start making our way to the Oregon coast, and we haven't been able to do that. And so I think that's one of the reasons why this deck really called to me, because I could kind of tap into that energy, even though I can't actually go there right now. And so I really just, yeah, it's beautiful. I really like the artwork. I'm really looking forward to working with this one, particularly in terms of my wellness practice. And then I'm sure at that point it'll probably make its way into rotation with some of my tarot decks as well, because I'm thinking this one and the Mermaid Tarot might go together pretty well. But yeah, it's just a gorgeous deck. Really looking forward to working with it. Again, it's one that was on my list as soon as it came out, and I just kind of, you know, I put it on my wish list and was like, oh, I'll get it eventually. So that is the Whispers of the Ocean Oracle cards. So I hope you enjoyed this look at the tarot and oracle decks that I have purchased over the last month and a half in my falling off the depth year wagon binge period. I would love to know if you're doing a depth year, how it's going so far. I know I just did a check-in a month ago, but things have been a little bit crazy lately, right? Things have been a little bit off kilter, and some of the things that I had intended to do, I haven't been able to get back to doing because of current circumstances in the world. But anyway, I would love to know how things are going with you. What decks have you purchased lately? What are you enjoying? Feel free to share with me in the comments below. Thank you for joining me today. You will find links for the decks featured here in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed this video and will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.